This French Bulldog wouldn't budge. For hours he stood guard at a grave. What he was protecting? No one could believe it. Stay with us because what was uncovered left an entire town in shock. If you're ready for a story that will tug at your heart, take just a second to like and subscribe. It helps us share stories like this. In a quiet countryside cemetery, there was something that caught the attention of everyone who passed by. A French bulldog sitting silently by a grave, unmoving. Day and night, through rain or shine, he refused to leave. People whispered, wondering what kept him there. But it wasn't until someone decided to investigate that the truth came out, a discovery that would leave everyone stunned. Days passed, and the mystery only deepened. People from nearby towns started to hear about the French bulldog that refused to leave the grave. What made this dog so loyal? Was it simply the natural bond between a pet and its owner, or was something more at play here? Every morning the dog was there, his small, sturdy frame planted firmly beside the gravestone, unmoving. Rain or shine, the dog stood guard. His eyes never left the spot where his owner was buried. At first, passers-by assumed it was just a display of loyalty, nothing more, nothing less. But as time went on, curiosity grew into concern. People started wondering, why was the dog still here? Locals had grown accustomed to seeing him, but no one could explain his unshakable behavior. Some said the dog must have been waiting for its owner to come back, but how could it not understand the finality of death? The grave was clearly marked with the name of a man who had passed away months earlier. Yet there the dog stood, day after day, as if on a mission. Not a single person had seen him leave the grave, not even for food or water. He just remained rooted there, seemingly without a care for the world around him. Over time, a few curious individuals from the town started to visit the cemetery, eager to learn why this dog had become so fixated on the grave. One of them, an older woman named Helen, was the first to approach the dog. She had seen him for weeks now, standing there, and each time it tugged at her heart. She could see the intensity in his eyes. Something about him seemed different, like there was a reason, a purpose behind his vigil. One morning, Helen brought a bowl of water and set it just a few feet away from the dog, hoping to coax him into drinking. She didn't want to disturb him, but she was worried. After all, how could a dog survive for this long without eating or drinking? To her surprise, the dog didn't budge, not even when the water was placed in front of him. His gaze remained fixed, locked on the grave. It was as if he didn't notice her at all. His posture was stiff, unyielding. But there was something else, something strange. Helen noticed a faint sound like a soft whimper coming from the direction of the grave. It wasn't a regular dog noise. It was almost as if something was calling out from below, something no one else could hear. She froze, her heart racing. Could the dog be hearing something she couldn't? Helen wasn't the only one who felt uneasy. More people began to visit the cemetery, and some reported hearing odd, faint noises coming from around the grave. There were whispers of a low growl or a distant whimper, and at times, it almost sounded like the earth itself was shifting. But every time someone went to investigate, they found nothing. No sign of anything unusual under the ground, nothing that could explain the sounds. It was as if the grave itself had become a mystery, a place that held secrets no one could access. Yet the dog remained unwavering, refusing to leave. Then there was something else, a subtle clue that had gone unnoticed by most. Small, irregular marks around the base of the grave. It wasn't until a local man named Jacob came by one evening that anyone took a closer look. Jacob had been a farmer all his life, and he was used to seeing animals behave in strange ways. But this was something different. He kneeled beside the grave, inspecting the ground with a careful eye. What he saw shocked him. There were faint scratch marks, dug into the soil as though someone, or something, had been trying to claw its way out from beneath. Jacob's eyes widened as he traced the marks with his finger. Could this be a sign of something or someone? buried under the grave. He wasn't sure, but his gut told him there was more to this than just a grieving dog. He went back to the village and shared his findings with a few others. Word spread quickly. People who had once thought the dog's behavior was nothing more than loyalty now began to wonder. Was the dog guarding something? Or was he warning people about something hidden beneath the surface? The more the townspeople investigated, the more they realized that this dog wasn't just loyal. He was connected to the grave in a way no one could have imagined. The more they learned about the dog's past, the more the puzzle pieces began to fit together. This wasn't just a grave to the dog. It was his grave. Or rather, the grave of someone he had loved deeply. The bond between them was undeniable. And as strange as it seemed, there was something deeply emotional about this dog's behavior. Could it be that the dog had been protecting a secret all along, one that no one knew, not even his owner's family? As days stretched into weeks, more and more people from the surrounding area started to take notice of the French Bulldog and his unshakable vigilance at the grave. The gravekeeper, an elderly man named Samuel, had worked at this cemetery for decades. He'd seen his share of grieving pets and families, but this situation felt different. Every time he passed by the graveyard, he noticed the dog, still there, staring at the grave, unmoving. And over time, something about the dog's demeanor unsettled him. It was as if the dog wasn't just mourning. No, it was more like the dog was guarding the grave. Samuel felt uneasy every time he saw him. As the weeks went by, Samuel began to wonder if there was more to the dog's loyalty than just grief. Had this dog been left behind by a family who hadn't realized how much he had bonded with the deceased? Or was there something deeper at play? The dog didn't act like a normal pet. It wasn't simply mourning the loss of its owner. The bond between them felt spiritual, as if the dog had been chosen to protect something buried in the earth. Samuel wasn't the only one growing suspicious. The neighbors started talking. The local family who lived nearby, the Millers, knew the man buried in the grave. He was a beloved local figure known for his charitable work. His death had been a shock to the community, but the Millers had never seen the dog around before the funeral. They knew that the French Bulldog had been adopted only recently by the man's widow, but they couldn't understand why the dog had become so attached to the grave. It wasn't just mourning. It was as if he was guarding a secret. Then, one evening, a local animal rescue team took matters into their own hands. Word had spread through the town about the dog's strange behavior, and some worried that he might be suffering from distress or starvation. The animal rescue team arrived, hoping to coax the dog away from the grave with food and gentle calls. But despite their best efforts, the dog remained still. No matter how much food they placed before him, the dog didn't flinch. He wasn't hungry, or at least, not for the food they had brought. One of the team members, a woman named Rachel, crouched down low and spoke softly to the dog, but his eyes never left the grave. His stance was firm, protective. Rachel noticed that despite his seemingly calm appearance, there was something intense about the way he looked at the ground, something primal. She could feel his attention was fixed on the grave, as if it were a sacred place that only he had the right to protect. There was no moving him, and that was when Rachel's heart sank. She realized the dog wasn't going to leave, not for food, not for anything. Rachel turned to the rest of the team, but they were at a loss. They all shared the same silent realization. Something much deeper was at work here. The dog wasn't acting like any animal they had ever encountered. There was no way of knowing if he was waiting for someone or something to come back. But what could the dog be guarding? What was it protecting? At that moment, Rachel made a decision. She spent hours sitting by the dog, watching him carefully. She didn't try to feed him and she didn't try to coax him. Instead, she simply observed. And in the quiet of those long hours, she noticed something that sent a chill down her spine. The way the dog's body would tense whenever someone approached the grave. His eyes would narrow, his posture rigid, like a soldier guarding a post. It was then that Rachel understood the depth of the bond this dog had with the grave, and she suspected that whatever it was, the dog had a purpose in remaining there. Flashbacks began to surface among the townspeople. The dog's owner had been a gentleman named Thomas, and those who had known him described him as a kind soul, devoted to animals and people alike. Thomas had adopted the French Bulldog a few months before his passing, and from the very start, the bond between them was undeniable. Thomas had been a quiet man, content with his work as a carpenter, but he had always found solace in the companionship of his dog. Neighbors recalled seeing them together on daily walks, Thomas always in good spirits, the dog by his side, as if they were two halves of a whole. One neighbor, Emily, remembered one particular moment with vivid clarity. She had been talking to Thomas one afternoon as he walked the dog near the edge of the cemetery. Thomas had paused, looking over at the gravestones with a contemplative expression. "When my time comes," he had said, "I want to be buried right here, where I know my best friend will always be by my side." Emily had laughed, assuming it was just a casual remark. But now, looking back, she wondered if Thomas had known more than anyone realized. It was that bond, that deep, quiet understanding between Thomas and the dog that seemed to guide everything that had happened since his death. Thomas's widow, who was still alive, had told Rachel that Thomas had been particularly close to the dog in the last few months of his life. He had often said the dog understood him like no one else could. Could it be that the dog knew something about Thomas's passing, something the rest of the town didn't? As the days went on, an eerie atmosphere seemed to hang over the cemetery. One particularly still night, a neighbor named Henry was walking home from the nearby pub when he passed by the graveyard. The moonlight cast long shadows over the rows of graves, but one thing stood out to him. He could hear something coming from the grave, a soft sound, a faint, almost inaudible noise. It sounded like something was digging beneath the earth. Henry froze, straining his ears. It wasn't an animal sound. It was as if something or someone was trying to claw its way out of the ground. He stood there, too frightened to move, but the sound didn't stop. Henry quickly ran to the local authorities, his heart racing. When he explained what he had heard, they were skeptical at first. But after a few more reports from other townspeople who had heard similar sounds, the authorities decided they had no choice but to investigate. They agreed, reluctantly, to exhume the grave. The idea of disturbing the resting place of a loved one was a heavy one, but the growing mystery surrounding the dog and the sounds left them no option but to take action. The night before the exhumation, the dog was nowhere to be found. He had finally left the grave, but the townspeople didn't know where he had gone. They wondered, was he trying to lead them somewhere? Was he afraid of what was to come? The following day, authorities, along with the dog's owner's widow, gathered at the cemetery. The air was thick with tension as the crew began to dig. Everyone felt the weight of what they were about to uncover. No one spoke, no one moved. It was as though the entire town held its breath. And then the moment came. As the ground was slowly peeled back, something strange caught everyone's eye. The earth was unusually soft, as if it had been disturbed recently, and then a noise, a soft thud, as if the earth was giving way. The workers paused. It wasn't just the earth shifting, it was something more. As the earth was finally cleared, the gravekeeper Samuel, the authorities, and the dog's widow watched in tense silence. The air was thick with anticipation. What they were about to uncover, no one could have predicted. With a final push of the shovel, the workers exposed a hidden compartment in the grave. Buried just beneath the coffin, it was no ordinary burial site. The compartment was small, almost like a secret space, designed with deliberate care. And inside, to the shock of everyone present, was something that could only be described as unbelievable. A tiny, trembling kitten, no more than a few weeks old, was curled up in the compartment, barely clinging to life. But it wasn't just the kitten that caused shock. It was the message that was found tucked beneath it, rolled tightly in a piece of cloth. As the workers gently unrolled the fabric, they found a note written in Thomas's handwriting. His words were clear, and his intention was heartbreaking. My best friend is more than a dog. He's my protector. I know the time is near, and I can't bear to leave him alone. If something happens to me, let him know that the last part of me lives on with him. Please, watch over him as he has watched over me. The message was a last request, a plea for the dog's well-being after his death, ensuring the bond between them would live on. It was a connection that transcended the ordinary, a bond forged not just between a man and his pet, but a deeper understanding of loyalty, devotion, and love. The realization hit like a wave. Thomas, knowing his time was near, had prepared for the possibility that he might not be there for the dog. He had made sure, in his final moments, that the French Bulldog would never be alone. That's why the dog had refused to leave the grave. It wasn't just a place of mourning, it was a place of purpose. The dog had been protecting the last piece of his owner's love and care, a message to ensure his safety after Thomas was gone. The townspeople, who had gathered in quiet disbelief, were overcome with emotion. Some wiped away tears, while others stood frozen, struggling to process the immense bond that had just been revealed. They had witnessed the dog's unwavering loyalty, but none had imagined the reason behind it. The realization that the dog had been guarding not just a grave, but a promise from his owner to always watch over him, left the town speechless. And the kitten, the small creature who had been hidden in that compartment all along, was a symbol of Thomas's last wish, a living connection between him and the dog. The dog's loyalty hadn't just been to a grave, it had been to a tiny, helpless life that Thomas had left behind, one final bond to ensure his beloved French Bulldog would have someone else to care for. The kitten was a living reminder of their connection, a gift meant to ease the dog's loneliness and keep him grounded in love. As the kitten mewed softly in the arms of the widow, the townspeople stood in awe. For all their curiosity and skepticism, none of them had expected this deep, emotional truth. The dog had been protecting more than just a resting place. He had been guarding a piece of his owner's heart, ensuring the promise Thomas had made was fulfilled even in his absence. The dog, now standing just a few feet away, looked at the kitten with gentle eyes. It was as if he knew his mission had been completed. His job, his unyielding vigil, had been to protect the kitten, the last connection to his owner, and now, with the kitten safe, he could finally rest. The dog sat down, his gaze shifting between the kitten and the grave, a quiet, serene acknowledgement of the love that had never left him. The town, in that moment, felt a collective sense of closure. They had witnessed something truly extraordinary, a bond that transcended death itself. And as the dog finally relaxed, lying down beside the kitten, the town felt something rare and beautiful, the undeniable truth that love, loyalty, and devotion never truly end. At the heart of this extraordinary story lies an unbreakable truth. The loyalty of animals knows no bounds. This French Bulldog's devotion to his owner went beyond what many of us can imagine. It was a love that refused to die, a bond that stretched past the grave itself. The way he guarded that grave day after day proved just how deeply animals can care for us, even in death. This story touched the hearts of everyone who heard it. It showed us that loyalty isn't just about companionship in life. It's about standing by each other, no matter what. The French Bulldog's vigil was a testament to how far love can go, how it can transcend time, and how it can live on even when we least expect it. As we reflect on this tale, we're reminded of the profound connection we share with our pets. Their loyalty doesn't come with conditions. It's given freely, and it's a reminder of the purest love we can know. Want more stories like this one? Don't forget to subscribe and stick around for our next incredible tale.